And so there's two things that I wanted to add to what we had done today. One of them was just to make the partial that we implemented a little bit more flexible. And so right now we have the partial, which is like a card, and it's being displayed on the horse show page multiple times. And then on the individual horse pages, it's being shown one time for that horse. But I just wanted to show how we could sort of customize that partial a little bit. One thing that's a bit awkward about the individual horse show page is that the name of the horse is still a link, and it's a link to the page that we're already on, right? So it's not the end of the world, right? We need that link in the partial here so that when we can click on the name of the horse, we get to its own page. But once we actually get to the page here, we don't need it so much anymore. And so it'd be nice to have like a way of like passing in a flag to this partial so that sometimes we show the link and sometimes we don't. And so I'm going to open up that partial. If we remember, it's in the app views horses folder. There it is right here. And it's this right here, this link to the horse that either should be the link, or maybe it should in some cases just be the horse's name. So I'm going to, it's inside of a paragraph tag. I'm going to separate that paragraph tag out so that the start and end of the tags go onto separate lines. And I'm just going to invent a flag, one that doesn't actually exist yet. So what I would like is I'd like to be able to have a flag that says if show link, then it'll show the link. Otherwise, it'll just echo out the horse's name. So this is my little bit of logic. And so on the horse show page, it will just display the horse name. On the breed page, where we're showing a collection of horses, it'll show the links. Now, that show link variable doesn't exist anywhere yet. And just for testing purposes, I'm going to make it exist up at the top here. And so above line 1, I'm just hit enter a few times. I'm just going to make a little block of ERD where I can bring that thing into existence and set it to either true or false. We're eventually just going to remove that. I just want to test out my logic. I want to test to see if this if-else statement properly works. So with show link set to true, when I go to this page, it should still be the exact same. It should just still show that link, which just links to itself. But if I set show link to false, the link goes away. And so the link's gone everywhere, even if I go into this multiple pages view. No more links. Put it back to true. Bunch of links. So the logic is there. I now just need some way of passing in that flag to the partial when we render it. And we're rendering it in 2 locations. So I'm going to remove these 3 lines. And then we're rendering it in 2 locations. We've got it happening once in the horses show and once in the breeds show. In the horses show, we're rendering it with just a render horse statement. And in the breeds show, we are rendering it again with a render statement, but this time we're passing in a collection so that it renders over and over and over. These are sort of the short forms of a more explicit way of calling render. And if we want to pass in extra flags, we have to go to that more explicit way of calling the render command. And so I'm going to start with the app views horses version, and I'm going to make it the more explicit version. I'm going to say render partial horse, and then I'm going to go to the next line. I'm going to say using the object horse. And so that is the same thing. The other one was just a short form way of doing it that worked because of naming conventions, because my object was of type horse and because I called the partial horse and all that jazz. I could get away with the short form. So if I save this, nothing should change. I should still be able to go back here. Oh yeah, I still don't have that link. So I need to make that link come into existence, the show link flag. And so how I do that is I can add a third parameter a third argument to render, and it is locals. And locals is just going to be a hash, and the key value pairs of this hash become variables and data in the partial. So if I, in this hash, create a key called showLink, and I set it to true, well then inside of the partial, I'm going to end up with a variable called showLink that has a value of true. And I could pass in other things as well. I could have, even more, like some other flag that was false or something like that. And then both of those would then become variables inside of the partial. I only need one in this case. So we now have render, partial, horse. The object is horse, and the locals, we have a single local, show link true. If I go back over here, it works. This is really the page though where we don't want to show the link. And so I can go back over here and I can turn show link to false. And then no more link. So we've customized it on this page. That's great. A few warnings. In the other section, there was a few students that wanted to remember the shortened form of this. And so they left it inside of a HTML comment. It looks like it's commented out, but if I go to this page, I get an error. And the reason is that the HTML comments don't actually prevent the ERB from executing. You can have ERB that generates stuff that will generate inside of comment blocks. So just because you've commented it out with HTML doesn't mean that you've actually commented it out in terms of Ruby code. To do that, I believe we need to add a Ruby comment as well. That doesn't work either. Encountered a syntax error. Like that, does that work? Yeah. So I replaced the equals with a hash mark. So that's just sort of a general thing to know about ERB, is that if you try to comment out some ERB with HTML comments, it actually doesn't work. You need sort of a pairing, right? If you don't have the HTML comments and you comment it out like this, yeah, it won't execute anymore, but now it'll, oh neat. I was figuring it would show up in the page. Did it show up anywhere here? It didn't. That's cool. Okay, so that maybe that's a new thing, because it used to be that it would then show up in the page and you had to sort of pair the HTML comment with the ERB comment, but it looks like that's the best way to do it. So if you want to keep that in there, you can, just to remind yourself of that shortened form. I'm going to remove it myself. And then we're going to go over to the other location where the partial is being rendered. Again, it's being rendered in a short form, this time with a collection. And so we need to type in what the long form is for a collection partial. And that is a little bit like this. We say partial, and I'm going to fill in that string in a second. We're stating that this is for a collection, and there's the collection. We're still defining some locals, and we're saying that show link in the case of the multiple horses page should be true. And for the partial, we have to do sort of like a pseudo pathing to the partial. It's not like a real path because we're not putting in like the entire file name, but we're going to specify that this is a partial in the horses folder called horse. And so we're not really pathing because we're not including the underscore or the html.erb, but we're just hinting to Rails that the partial is located in the horses view folder and it's a horse partial. So if we look at those two, the only real difference is this one has an object and we're passing it a single object. It'll render it once, and our locals is set to show link false there. And then here it's a collection and we're passing it a collection, and locals is set to true. And so if we go back over to our page, this works well, no link. This works well, there is a link on each one of them. So that's exactly what we wanted to see. So that can be done to make these kind of partials a little bit more flexible. You can get carried away with it though. If you find yourself adding way too many locals, way too many flags, like the whole point of a partial is that you're taking some kind of duplicated data and removing repetition in your code. If you have tons and tons of locals that you're passing in that are changing the behavior, then it's probably not actually any real replication, and you're maybe just making things more complicated than they need to be. The other thing I'm going to quickly show you is just one of the things that I often do with Rails to sort of see how things operate is I look at Rails projects where some scaffolding is being done. And so if I open up the demo blog that I showed you earlier on in this course, where we scaffold up a blog, if I go to the app views blog posts folder, we can see that there are partials there as well. There's one partial in there, which is a JSON JBuilder partial. This is for when you are using Rails to create a JSON API. And so this is a partial that sort of explains how a object should be generated to produce JSON. So sometimes you might want to leave off some of the properties. Sometimes you want to modify them slightly. So this particular partial is called a JBuilder, and it's how we build Rails APIs. The other one that we can find in that folder, if you remember the blog was set up in such a way that there was a page where you could create a new blog post and a page where you can edit a blog post. And if we look at the new and we look at the edit, neither of them actually contains a form. They both just render a form passing in a particular blog post. And if we go to the form partial, we can see that's where the form actually lives, because it's the same form. Like it has all the same elements. If we add to this form, well, now we only need to add in one place. We don't need to change the form on both the edit and the new page. So just another example of how partials can be used in a Rails application. I'm going to show you one other use of that because we're about to do something new with our app, which is to add search capabilities, sort of a simple search to our app. Before I do that, any questions about the partial that we just modified? Okay, so I'm just going to commit this change here. Updated the horse partial to include a show link flag. So what I want is this is the capability of doing a search. I'd like a little form. It's going to have a single text input and a single submit button. And when I submit that, I want to use active record to search for a horse by name. Initially, I'll make the search a little bit naive in that it'll only search by like full name. And then we'll make it more flexible that where we can search for like a partial name and it'll find partial matches. So we could search potentially just for the letter E and find all horses that have the letter E in their name or something along those lines. And so for that, I'm going to make use of another partial. What I could do is I could go into, I want the search to appear on every page. So I could go in here to the application layout, and I could put the form right here. But then I'm sort of starting to over complexify the application layout. It might be better to keep this form in its own little isolated area. So sometimes even if you're not going to use it in multiple places, it'll be good to sort of abstract it out. And so I'm going to put a render statement in here. I'm just going to say render partial shared slash search. Or maybe it's related to the horse, so it'll be like horses slash search. And then I'm going to go into my horses folder and I'm going to make a new file. And it's going to be underscore search.html.erb. I was initially thinking that I would make a whole new folder in the views folder called shared and just put it in there. But this is really related to horses, so I can put it in there. So I've got that in here. This is my layout file. It's got render partial horses slash search. And just to test that it's working in this search partial, I can just put in it works. And what we should see is that when we go to view any page in our application, right below the header, but above where the view gets rendered, we should see that paragraph that it says it works. There it is on the root page. There it is on the breed show page, and there it is on the individual show page. So that works. Now I actually want it to be a search form. So I'll first make it a search form, and then I will add some Bulma styling to make it look a little bit nicer. When you think about how we build links in Rails, we use a helper. We use like link to, and it builds the link for us. The same thing is going to go for searching. We're going to use a helper to build the form for us. And I'm going to copy and paste some code from guides.rubyonrails.org. So if you're coding along, you might also want to go to guides.rubyonrails.org so that you don't have to type out this same code. And there is a whole guide just on action view form helpers. And if I scroll down, example 1.1 is a generic search form, which is exactly what we need. And so that I'm going to copy. I'm going to copy the 5 lines of code that are in section 1.1. So if we look at this here, we have a few things. It says form with, and then it says URL/search method get. What that means is when this form gets submitted, it's going to make a get request to /search. I'm going to change that in a moment. We're going to make our own custom route for where our search goes to, but that's fine for now. And then inside of here, it's creating a label tag that says search for, a text field tag that's going to generate some input, an input tag, and a submit tag. So if I save this, we can go view source and see what this actually generates. So there's what it looks like. Again, not styled yet. Here's what it looks like in the markup. And then we can actually put those sort of like on the same page here. So the form with and the end generate the initial form and the close of the form. So we don't have to close the form ourselves. It gets auto-closed at the end. The form with generates the start of the form. You can see there's the action is set to search. I could change that here. The method is set to get. That's happening over here. You can see here there's something called data remote true. This is because Rails tries to do everything in an Ajaxy manner. It tries to not do full page refreshes. So when you submit a form, the default behavior is to send that form off using JavaScript so that it doesn't actually reload the page. In our case, we don't want that behavior. I don't want to get into some extra complexity here. And so I'm going to add local true to my search form here. And so that when I reload the page, it becomes just a regular form action. It doesn't say that remote data in there anymore. This label tag right here is what generated this label. This text field tag right here is what generated this input of type text. And you can see the letter Q is what set its name and its ID. And then lastly, the submit tag generated input of type submit and a value of search. So I'm going to make a few changes. I'm going to remove the label tag. I don't need that. I'm going to change this to search term. So that is that's when I submit my search, it's going to be known as the search term. So whatever the user searches for will be known as the search term. Everything else can remain the same. So again, if I reload this and we look at that form in markup land, there it is. You can see the input is now labeled search term. If I go to the page and I reload it, I just go to the root. I'm also just temporarily going to set the URL to the root path. Because what I want to do is I want to see what actually happens when I search this form. Where does this data go? And so I'm just going to put WAT in there. And if I click search, we can see that we are still at the root. And we've got question mark search term equals WAT. So the search went into the URL. And that's because the method was get. If I set the method to post, that wouldn't have affected the URL. And it would have gone into Rails's params hash. But when you're building out searches, it's sometimes handy. Someone might want to, send, the URL of an existing search or save a URL. So it's typically best practice to make searches get requests and not post requests, so that they can be linkable and shareable and all that kind of webby stuff. So that's what happens to our search term. Anything we put in here ends up in the URL in just a regular get parameter key value pair. Behind the scenes, that also in terms of Rails goes into that special params hash. And we've used that params hash when we were pulling out like IDs out of URLs. We can now also use the params hash to pull the search term out of the URL. And so now I need a few other things. I need, I don't want to just send this to the root path. I want an actual action that I can send this to, and a view associated with that action, and a route associated with that action. So I need three things. So I'll just commit these, added a search form via a partial to the layout. And then I want to open up the routes and the horses controller. I'm going to need to create a new view in a moment as well. So in the horses controller, I'm going to create a search action. There's nothing special about that name. I've just named it search. And when I set up the route, I'm probably going to make it just be a live it like /search. And it's going to have, based on the form, remembering that the search term is going to come along for the ride. Search term equals user search terms. So this is just a comment that's helping me remember how this is being implemented, and it's within here where I'm actually going to perform the search. This search term ends up in the params hash, so I can search for horses using the horse model where, and initially I'm going to do a bit of a naive search. I'm just going to say name, colon, params, search term. And this is naive in that when you do a where clause like this, it's an exact match. So if I search for exactly the name of a horse, and there is an exact match to a horse in the database with that name, it'll find that horse. But if I search for a partial name, so if I have a horse named Misty, but I search for Mist, it's not going to find anything right now. It'll only find the full exact match. I still need, though, to actually define this route in the routing file, and I need a page on which to display these search results. And I already have a partial that I can use to display them, so that's nice. So I can define the route. I can define it, at least initially, just manually. I can say a GET request to /search should go to the horses search action, and within the views, this should be known as the search path. This is the search path. Now that I have that route, I can use it within my form, because right now the form is just going to the root, and we just did that for testing purposes. I actually want the form to send its data to this search path so that the data gets sent to that action that we just wrote. So in the form, I changed this URL where the form is going to send its data to the search path. So we're just sort of wiring things up now. The form exists on every page. When the form gets submitted, it will send by way of a GET request to the search path, that's /search. That's going to then trigger our route, which will then invoke the search action in the horses controller, at which point I can go and pull the user's search term out of the params hash and search for my horses. And so the very last thing to do is to make a view to display that data. And so in my views, I can make a new file and I can call it search.html.erb. So a better name for our partial might have been like search form, because now I have like a search.html.erb, which is actually the search results, and I have a search. We can fix that up maybe in a moment, rename some things. But nonetheless, in here, I just need to have a div with a class of columns, and then I can just render out my partial. And in fact, I can just copy what I did inside of the, I'll just write it out, it won't take me very long. Render partial horses/horse for the collection horses, and then I do want links, so locals show links true, and then I can close up that div. The div needs to be there just because we're rendering those cards as columns, just like we did on that show page for the breeds. We want the same for our search results. Everything should now be wired up correctly. We display this form on every page. When the form is submitted, the data gets sent by way of a GET request to the search path. That triggers this route, which in turn triggers this action, which in turn does the actual searching, making this @horses variable accessible to the associated view, the view of the same name, which is the search. Let's see if I made any mistakes. First, I want to know a name of a horse that actually exists, like Brandy. Brandy. Uh-oh, blows up. Undefined local method, so it doesn't like my show link. Oh, it's because it show links. Oh, yeah, show link. That's it. It's just a typo there. My locals is show link singular. There's Brandy. If I search though for bra, it doesn't find anything. And so I need a little bit more flexibility with my search. It works if I know the full name of a horse, but that's not, like, if you already knew the full name of the horse, you probably wouldn't be searching. Before I go and make some improvements to the search, does anyone need to see any of these pages that are up here? The partial, or the routes, or the controller, or the search result page? All right, let's make a little bit of improvements. It is bothering me, this naming, so I'm just going to change the name of my search partial just to search form. And then in the application layout, I need to change that as well. Looks like it's still working. Ish. Misty. Yeah, there's Misty. Let's make the improvements then to the actual search. When we're working with SQL, we can do non-exact matches. What's the wildcard character in SQL? It's the %, yeah. And so in Rails, when we have a perfect match, we just do like the key and the value. If we have something that needs to be a little bit more customized, in the where command here, we can write like the little snippet of SQL that we'd want to be part of the SQL where clause. And so that little snippet of SQL, I'm going to put it inside of double quotes. And it's going to say like where name. And when you're doing a non-exact match in SQL, it's the like instead of the equal sign that you use. So where the name is like, and then in single quotes, I'm going to put in a %, then I'm going to interpolate in my search term, and then I'm going to put a % at the end of it. And so that'll take whatever the user searched for, it'll glue wildcards on either side of it, so that when we search, it'll have those wildcards on both sides. So it'll perform a sort of a full partial match. But there is some problems here. Danger, 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 danger. One more danger. This is there's a major problem. So all this will solve the problem of the overly specific search, but I have put a security hole into my application. So we're going to have to fix that in a moment as well. Is it fine? SQL injection. Nobody knows about SQL injection attacks. So if I search for Misty, it still works. If I search for mist, it finds Misty. If I search for the letter I, it should find all of the animals that have the letter I in it. It looks like I forgot in the search page to specify is multi-line. That's in the search.html.erb beside columns. So if I search for the letter E, for example, there's every horse with the letter E in its name. Are there a few genes? There's only one gene. Before I fix up the problem that has to do with the SQL injection, we could also in here do something like found size result. Oops, I don't need that. Do that. Just a little message right at the top. Found, I'm using the pluralize helper, so it'll take the size of the result set that's found, and it'll either say found one result, or, oh, I don't even need results here. So it'll say found one result, or found two results, found three results for the search, and then I'm also outputting the search terms that the user searched for. And keep that on the page. Now when I search for the letter E, it says found 33 results for the search E. Maybe it says for the search term E. AR. Found 10 results for the search term AR. Save this to Git. I could say implemented a simple search, but currently there's a SQL injection issue. When you're operating with Rails and you do what we were doing before, like when we just said like horse.where name params search term blah blah blah, there's no danger of SQL injection here because Rails is going to generate what's called a parameterized SQL statement, and those are guarded by SQL from SQL injections. But when we just go and we build a little snippet of SQL and we take some data from the scary internet and we just paste it right into our SQL string, that is like a prime target for SQL injection. And so we need to fix that. And there is a simple fix though. And what that simple fix is I can put a question mark in there. I can make it a parameterized search. So I can say horse where name like question mark. And we can have as many question marks as we want in a statement. And then after that, for each question mark, we have to put a comma and then another argument for what should go into that question mark. And in our case, it's a string with the param search term interpolated inside of 2 percentage signs. So effectively, I'm going to be generating the same SQL, but I'm doing now the generation by way of a parameterized search, not by way of just building up a string, and that will protect me from the SQL injection attack. So I can take my danger message away now. And so if I go back, my code should still work the same. And it does. We're almost done for the day. The very last thing that I would like to do is just add a little bit of styling, Bulma styling to this, but I won't make you watch me do that. I'll just record that after class and I'll add it to this video. So I'll just pause right here. And I will unpause now to continue the styling. So this is the form that we want to style. And we want to style it using Bulma. And so I'll go to the Bulma documentation, go to the form section over here, and just to the general section. We can see how Bulma styled a number of things, and I know specifically there is an example of a search form down below where the input and the button are stacked side by side. Here's what we want. And so I'm going to copy and paste that entire snippet of code and drop it down below here. And so this is code that's going to go inside of a form itself, and it begins by, like, here's the input. I'm going to remove that, and I'm going to replace it with my text field tag. Here is the search button, so I'm going to remove that and replace it with my submit tag, and then I'm going to put it back into the form itself. So I'll remove the input, and I will take mine and put it in there. I'll remove the submit, and I'll drop it inside of there. And now I will take this end of the form, and I will put it at the end here. Now that does some of the work. The things that I removed though, the input, for example, has a class of input on it, and the button has a class of button is info. And so I need to get those classes back onto my input and my button. But notice that my input and my button are generated with helpers. So I need to figure out how to get those helpers to generate classes for me. And so I'm going to go to the Rails docs for those things. I'm going to go to the Rails API. And I'm going to look up text field tag to begin with. Text field tag. Name, value, options. Okay, and if we look deeper here, we can see some examples of when we're using name field tag, we want to have it create a class, or if we want to have it create a placeholder, we don't have a value that we want to assign to this thing initially, we can leave the value as nil. And so I can go to mine, here's the name, I can give the value of nil, and then I can specify a class, and according to the Bulma docs, this will be a class of input. That's from right here. And then I'm also going to give it a placeholder, just a little bit of placeholder text that'll be in light gray. So I'll say placeholder search courses by name. And then for the submit tag, I'm going to go back to the API. I'll search submit tag. Do a quick look there. And it looks like it's value and then options directly afterwards. And again, if we look down below here, we can see an example of assigning a class, submit tag, name, and then we just say class and what we want it to equal. And according to this, the class should be equal to button is info. So I'll copy that in here, and I'll say class, and I'll paste that in. So we've now properly styled this form according to Bulma. We've wrapped it in a field that has add-ons. That's going to be the has add-ons gives the ability for them to stack side by side nicely. So if we go back to the page and we reload it, that looks nice, very nice looking. It's a little too close though to what follows below it. And so same thing goes for it, after we search, I'd like maybe the search results to be a little further down. And as we navigate around the site, you can see that there could be a little bit of margin maybe between there and there. So I'm also going to give my form some a class so that I can target it for styling. So I'm going to look up form width and maybe see how we can add a little bit of a class to that as well. Form width, model, scope, URL, format, and then options is everything else. Okay, so let's try that. So let's see if I can just put in a class of search form. So it's just a class that I am making the name up of myself. And so if I go back over here, I view source, we should see there is my form, and it does have a class, you can see right here, of search form on it. Which means I can apply some styling to it just using the styling that we had set up last time in the app assets folder in the style sheet subfolder there. We had set up our own little styles.scss file. Any of the SCSS files we put in the style sheet folder get automatically loaded. So I can go in here and I can say a form with a class of search form should have a margin bottom of 2 rem. And we go back over here. And there we go. That looks nice. We can navigate around between our various aspects of our website. We can perform a search, find it. Maybe this needs to get pushed down a little bit. That right there is on the search results page. That's this right here in between the columns and here. So I could give this a class of search results. And then I could say div.search results margin top 1 rem. Yeah, that looks a little bit better. And if I search for the letter E, we'll get a whole bunch of them back, and I can go back to the main page. And we've now fully implemented our search. It's styled. You can see the fact that it's got the placeholder text in place. It says search horses by name. That's a little dim for my liking, but we'll leave that for now. And so thank you very much for sticking through to the end here and watching me implement a search in our Horses on Rails example app. See you next time.